swallowed the red pill back in 2008 and began reporting the news in front of a camera in 2019. In that time, we've seen a complete upheaval in world politics. The battle lines have changed between the illusion of left versus right to the reality of globalism versus nationalism. Despite all the information, the truth and the lies, there are two very distinct pathways emerging. Should we follow Labor and Liberal to a dystopic one-world government, or do we fight for our nationalism, unlock our hidden resources wealth and build a new Australia? With the world teetering on a knife's edge, should we solidify our relationship with the USA and become the 51st state? This is my mission statement here on Australian National Review, and I welcome you to Black Pill Me as hard as you can as we determine our future together. This is the 51st state. Hello and welcome to the 51st State for the very first Friday night edition of the show that is unlike any other in Australia. And I don't say that for any other reason than the fact that it truly is a show to open minds and start to rethink everything we thought we knew about the great lucky country that we live in that is currently under a spell, and we don't know what it is and why we can't get people to pay attention. Well, as you can see on the screen beside me, this is a different show today, and we are soon going to learn that we are suffering a problem. All of us are in trouble for reasons that one individual, Mariya Shmandiy, has suffered an incredible duress put upon her in the COVID period. And her problem now becomes our problem. And we will ask, how do you solve a problem like Mariya's? Today, we have learnt out of the United States massive breaking news that shows that the FBI is now in the frame for knowingly taking part in what will go down as a coup d'etat against a sitting president of the United States. The ramifications will change the world, and it is now spread around the world, including Australia, who has now been somewhat implicated, and these pieces will unravel in time, but have already. In a moment, I'm going to put up a screenshot of what we learnt today from ABC News explaining how big this really is, because the FBI, with its new director, Kash Patel, has made a secret visit to Australia and met with our Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke. What is that about? Well, we're going to find out, and already David Shoebridge from the Greens, of all parties, is already asking the questions, and our government news organisation is the first to report it. I'll put it up on the screen for you right now. There's your headline, and the shorts are that FBI Director Kash Patel stopped briefly in Australia this week and dined with Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke. Neither the Australian or US governments flagged the visit, with Mr. Burke only confirming it took place after being contacted by the ABC. Mr. Patel was in the region to open a permanent FBI office in New Zealand. And New Zealand doesn't get away with it easy because they are part of this Five Eyes arrangement. That is where we are going with that. But that is not the story for today. That is the premise of where we are. Now, in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our guest, and we are going to get on with a massive story that always starts with an individual until it affects all of us, and that will be the catalyst for change. Don't go anywhere. You are watching the 51st State, and we'll be back right after this.
Australian National Review is Australia's first real free and independent press. One with no editorial control by the elite, but a publication that can generate critical thinkers and critical debate, and hold those spreading mistruths and deliberate propaganda in mainstream media to account. News with a difference that will be educational, compelling, and create a platform for political and social change in this country, and address the real issues facing this country and the world.
And welcome back to the 51st State. Mariya Shmandiy is an HR consultant who lived in South Australia during the COVID era and unwittingly became the face of how overreach and injustice can affect anyone. Her story is a warning to all of us, and you will soon find out it is a story that does not just affect her, it's actually everyone's problem, and soon you'll find out why. Mariya Shmandiy, welcome to the 51st State.
Thanks, Jason. Glad to be here.
Gosh, Mariya, it is a story that I simply cannot believe that, and I know I've heard it, and this has been going back some time now, but every time someone discovers your story, they are staggered because it starts with your retelling, but it just keeps building and building. You're like, when is the circuit breaker going to happen in this story? But it doesn't happen. It just keeps going worse and worse and worse. And as you tell the story, it's almost as if there is, you have to have a nervous laughter telling it, because I almost feel like you're still in disbelief about what happened. Do you look back today and think it really happened, or do you think that there was some parallel universe, for example, that you're in?
Yeah, it's honestly really crazy times. Sometimes you think, was I living a horrid nightmare? What happened 5 years ago? Yeah, it's just undescribable. You wouldn't never think that in this day and age we're moving backwards, not forwards.
It's beyond frightening, of course, to think that what happened to you could happen to anyone, and did happen to obviously many people during this period of time. But just to sort of paint a picture for us, go back, if you don't mind, to 2020, to the start of your reaction to this ongoing fiasco. Sort of like about April of 2020, we all got locked down and went through this process and daily case reports, etc. But we were in and out of various different lockdowns. You're living in South Australia. What was it that that sort of sparked the journey that began at that point for you?
At the time, I worked in an industry that was classified as mandated in the health industry, and it was pharmacy, actually. And I was overseeing the operations of many pharmacies, primarily the people operations. So I didn't really have much to do with the day-to-day pharmaceutical side of things. And what really became very evident at that time is this was a place where sick people were supposed to come. And we reported record numbers of people who were healthy. So there were hardly any sick people coming through the doors. And our sales plummeted as a result of that. So the only thing that escalated in sales were masks, COVID tests, and PPE equipment, sanitizer. So it became very evident to me quite early on that nothing was adding up. I worked in one of the most, I guess you could say, prestigious areas in South Australia, a shopping centre where a lot of people would do retail business. That's where the headquarters were based. And I was just seeing all these local businesses closing down, shutting their doors one by one. But, you know, Bunnings was still open, McDonald's was still open, and you could still get your alcohol almost at any time of the day. So a lot of the things were just not adding up to me. There was no sense behind the science. And that's when I started to dig deep and really question what was going on.
Of course, you weren't the only one, and we're all sort of stuck at home getting these ad nauseum daily updates of statistics and COVID cases, and it was all meant to pile up. And many people just made it part of their daily routine where they'd sit down for the 11 o'clock announcements with a cup of tea, almost as if witnessing, this great big pandemic fear campaign. But of course, the numbers didn't add up, and it wasn't long before those that were paying attention were realizing that we were kind of being hoodwinked. What I'd like to do is I'm going to show you on the screen now some statistics that will benefit those as a historical reminder of what we actually went through. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some New South Wales statistics. And the reason that I'm going to do that is they were considered to be the best during the pandemic, but also because New South Wales is the smaller of the states of those that we're going to talk about today, being New South Wales, South Australia, and the Northern Territory. And of course, that's going to just make it even seem more ludicrous about what we're talking about. So from New South Wales, here's a statistic for you. It's quite complicated, but it's a period of 6 months. And you can see there in the week ending, we're talking about, this is in correctional settings, which I thought was interesting to bring this up for you, Mariya, that there were literally no cases for weeks on end, none in these settings. Now, that's just in correctional settings, so it's virtually zero. Now, if we go to deaths in New South Wales, for the period of 2020, this is the entire year, you'll see on this page, you've got cases adding up to 4,500 cases in total. But when you look at deaths there broken down by age group, there was one death from 50 to 59 and not a single death under the age of 50 in New South Wales in the year of 2020, which was the period where the COVID virus was meant to be the most severe, the so-called alpha strain before it became Delta, before it became Omicron upon the arrival of the vaccine. And the purpose of that is that we were told when Omicron arrived that it was more virulent, but it would transmit easier, but it was less harmful. So if we weren't dying during the hard times of the virus, why would we be afraid as we're moving into the vaccine period in early of 2021? Now, I'm going to jump ahead now, and I'm going to show you a chart out of South Australia from today. This is a chart showing you the annual COVID cases across the 5 years. And 2021 is in blue. And I don't know if you can actually see, but 2021, there was virtually no cases of COVID in South Australia. Whereas if you fast forward to 2022, after the vaccine was widely taken, OMG, the cases are going off the charts. Now, people can argue that people were allowed to be let out, for example, but if everyone was taking the vaccine at 95% rates that they were telling us in Australia, how is it possible that so many people were getting COVID? Now, that's to support what you were saying. Were you aware of this at the time, that it was that obvious?
Yeah, I was really quite aware of that because the thing is they had actually locked down, again, a lot of South Australians around that period, 2021 specifically, because like you said, that was when the vaccines the mandates had just started coming in and everyone was being rushed and coerced into getting vaccinated to keep their jobs. But what's a funny thing, so I won't go too far into the story, but around the time that everything happened to me, and we'll find out a little bit more about that, South Australia actually only reported 5 new cases. Now, South Australia has about 1.2 million people. So in retrospect, if we can do maths, it's pretty easy, I think. What percentage does that come to? And that's not deaths, like you said, it's just cases. So, I mean, anyone who sneezed, anyone who had a runny nose, anyone who had a sore throat, a headache, you name it, we've all experienced these symptoms in our life, would be considered a case. So in that respect, out of that many sick people, there were only really 5 new sick people.
So I went behind the scenes earlier and I thought I might just do some comparisons. And it's interesting that you brought that up too. So we're comparing the area. So New South Wales in area is the smallest state, but by far the largest in population. And it comes down there, as you can see, people per square kilometre. And so even in New South Wales, 10 people per square kilometre is peanuts compared to the rest of the world. In South Australia, it's under 2 people per square kilometre. And the Northern Territory, it's 0.18. So in other words, there's 55 times more people in New South Wales than there is in the Northern Territory by that comparison. It's absolutely crazy to consider. Now what I'm going to do is show you Bureau of Statistics figures where we are talking about South Australia compared to other states. Having a look now on the screen. So this is total deaths by registration for the 5-year period due to COVID. If you look at that, in 2020, there were 63 deaths in New South Wales. There were 4 in South Australia. And in 2021, there were 3 in South Australia. And then look what happens in 2022 after the rollout of the vaccine, 845, followed by 371, followed by 9 in 2024. These figures, for anyone who's actually paying attention, are staggering. How is it possible that before the vaccine rollout, nobody was dying? And people might say, well, you were locked down. But after it, if it's meant to stop transmission and stop deaths, how is that the case? These numbers have never been sort of challenged by anyone, but it means that there has to be some form of satisfactory inquiry at least, because you can't go from 3 and 4 up to 845 and not ask any questions, right?
Exactly. What's the correlation? What's the you have to look at the reasons. And we weren't actually locked down in 2022, so everyone was supposedly vaccinated and, you know, free to do their go on with their business. So it doesn't explain the rampant COVID disease.
It doesn't explain. And also when you consider that there's 1.8 million people living in South Australia, according to those current statistics, and you're talking a total of 845 deaths, it's still a very low rate of death anywhere. I mean, if you compared it to flu, you'd find out that you'd be quite close. But we don't get locked down for flu, and we don't get discriminated against for flu when we're not forced to take flu injections. And this forms part of this unusual scenario that we have to suffer through, that you, of course, have paid the heaviest possible price here in Australia. Then again, you think about what are we meant to do? We then sign up by default to the WHO International Health Regulations. So we're now part of some pandemic treaty that is meant to then protect us or advance us in case of the next pandemic treaty. And what I find disturbing about that is that even Anthony Albanese himself suggested in the election campaign that this was a 1 in 100 year pandemic and it deserved a proper inquiry, that he wanted to have a royal commission. But once he got into the frame and realised that he was a chance of being elected, well, he started to backtrack against it. And we never had a royal commission in Australia. What I'd like to do now, Mariya, is play you a clip from 2023, which explains in real time the reasons why Anthony Albanese decided not to have a royal commission. Take a look.
Now, breaking news now. As you know, at the start of the program, I spoke about Anthony Albanese's broken promise to hold a royal commission into the COVID-19 response. Well, Phil Curry, the political editor at the Fin Review, has just broken the story that tomorrow, the Albanese government is expected to announce a commission of inquiry into the COVID-19 response. He says, though, and he has just written this on the Fin Review, that it is expected to fall short of the royal commission that Anthony Albanese promised when he's in opposition. One source told Phil Curry that the inquiry would aim to release an interim report before the end of this year, raising fears it will not be very thorough. And Phil Curry's revealed that the Commission of Inquiry will likely be conducted by an economist, an epidemiologist and a public administration expert. All right, let's bring in now National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie. Bridget, what's your reaction to this news that the Albanese government will announce tomorrow a Commission of Inquiry into the COVID-19
Well,
response?
It's another broken promise by Anthony Albanese. He went to the election promising a royal commission. They ran a select committee in the Senate throughout COVID, hearing from experts for, over a year. They heard from a wide range of experts right across the country. And out of that inquiry, they decided they would have a Royal Commission. Now, they're not delivering a Royal Commission. And there's only one reason why, Shari, and it's because a Royal Commission into COVID would have to look at National Cabinet, would have to look at how that functioned to keep us all safe through a global pandemic, but then look at the different jurisdictions' reactions. And that means seriously examining the actions of Premier Daniel Andrews in my home state of Victoria, where we were locked in our houses, where we're still dealing with the mental health outcomes, particularly for our young people, and the behaviour of Anastasia Palaszczuk when she slammed shut that border between New South Wales and Queensland and people couldn't deliver babies. I mean, it was just incredible.
So the difference between a Royal Commission and a judicial inquiry is that a Royal Commission could compel the states to give evidence.
Absolutely.
Whereas a Commission of Inquiry might not have that same power. So do you think this is a case of Albanese trying to protect the Labor state premiers?
Absolutely, Shari. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind. They are running hand in glove, promising, in my own portfolio area, for instance, in infrastructure, they are using taxpayers' funds to fund things like the suburban rail loop, $2.2 billion in Melbourne, pet project of Daniel Andrews, no scrutiny or cost-benefit analysis, but prepared to tip the money in because Daniel needs it. And similarly, up in Queensland, when you look at the funding for the Olympics, none of this has cost-benefit analyses, but they're prepared to do the bidding of these very powerful Labor premiers.
There's the headline right there from 2023, Australia COVID Inquiry, Anthony Albanese's broken election promise. Mariya, it's so important that you tell your story, but just reminding you there with that clip from 2023, how does that make you feel now in terms of what you have been up against and what you are still up against?
No surprises really, Jason. I mean, it's really been corruption from day dot and prior to 2020 as well, but my eyes only got really open to the real corruption that we're dealing with. And that is exactly what was stated in that video is all the directions, all the mandates, all the unlawful imposed repercussions on the population like myself was heavily handed and imposed by the federal government, but it was actually put onto the states to make those decisions. So now, Anthony Albanese and the previous government, ScoMo, say that it wasn't our fault. It wasn't us who made the decision. We passed it on to the states to impose those decisions. We made it voluntary, which is really just another crockery and complete mitigation strategy to cover up all the fraud, because it was a high-level fraud. It was, for myself, it was the executive government colluding with the judiciary, and they still are to this date. So, yeah.
So when you mentioned that ScoMo technically subcontracted out the federal government's responsibilities to the states so that they could mitigate the idea that nobody was held to account, and then Albanese gets in and then calls off a Royal Commission that compels the state governments to answer for their heavy-handedness. Your story is directly part of this because you were a victim of an overreach or an injustice that became as a result of what happened to you on this particular adventure that you'd set out to do. For the benefit of those that aren't aware of your story, despite the fact that it's been seen over 2 million times just on Facebook alone, can you fill us in on the details of how it was that you then become part of the attention of the South Australian Police upon this trip from or to the Northern Territory?
Yeah, so in November 2021, my mum and myself were travelling back to South Australia from our holiday in the Northern Territory. And we sparked great attention onto the South Australian government, specifically South Australia Police, who I'm going to refer to as SAPOL for the purpose of shortening the terminology. So because we were flagged as unvaccinated returning residents back to our home state, our home city, and I have quite a unique surname. I'm not English background, Australian background, so it was quite easy to flag my name on the system and target me. At the time, South Australians are generally quite compliant. They're not like Queenslanders or perhaps some of the other states. So anyone who spoke out, the government wanted to shut down and make an example out of. And so that's where it all began. But even a year prior to that, as you mentioned previously, I work as a HR consultant, and I was actually overseeing the operations of a pharmacy group. And so the organisation that I was working for was targeted as well for COVID overreach. And so because I was managing and overseeing, I guess, the lawful rights of my employees and protecting their privacy details, their confidentiality, and just their autonomy, bodily autonomy, to make their own choices about what they wanted to do with their health and with putting things into their body. I was targeted by SAPOL a year prior to that. So fast forwarding 1 year, I was already on their system. So I was simply, leaving the state to travel because it had been over a year and a half since we had already been locked down, and returning back to my home. We'd already actually entered the state. This is the whole comedy of events, already driven into South Australia. Marla checkpoint from Northern Territory is about just under an hour, or around an hour, and they had a checkpoint there pretty much with huge neon signs saying unvaccinated travellers, no entry.
Now, how do you register as unvaccinated? Remind the viewers, especially those overseas, how do people know your vaccine status? That's the big question.
So there was a South Australian government system that was used at the time through SA Gov, where you actually had to register your vaccination status. So any travellers coming into South Australia had to log their details into that system and provide evidence of their vaccination status. And so what happened was the night prior, on the 22nd of November, we actually it had only, so you know how with these directions they were changing overnight. Sometimes these directions would be in place for a week, other times they would be a few days. So the ball was changing and shifting all the time. So this was a new direction that actually came into effect exactly the day that we were entering into the state. And so we got notified at that point in time that unless you were double vaccinated, you couldn't actually enter into the state. So even those poor people who were coerced to take one vaccination, they say usually you have to wait, I think, 7 to 14 days before you take the second. They were locked out of the state as well. And even funnier to the point is even those people who are double vaccinated were still forced to isolate. So it's not like they were able to enter into South Australia and get on with their lives. So that just proves the point that we are making, that vaccination doesn't stop any transmission, and that they're in their own pretty much admission, the state has made it very clear that there's still a risk to the population. So, so we had this system, it was like a green tick or a cross, and we got the cross. And so we were pretty much stuck in no man's land at the time, because we made the decision to travel to the border, where we were turned back and forced to travel back to Northern Territory. We actually refused to do that because it was about 7 p.m. in the evening at that point in time and raining. And there was another lady who had done exactly the same leg of travel. So she travelled from the Northern Territory to the Marla checkpoint, only to be turned back because she was unvaccinated, to travel back to the Northern Territory checkpoint, only to be advised by the Northern Territory police that they had a hard border closure to all non-NT residents. So see how ridiculous it was? So it was two different types of restrictions. South Australia didn't allow anyone who was unvaccinated, even if you were a resident. But if you were an international traveller, so long as you were double vaccinated, no worries, you can enter into the state. Northern Territory didn't allow anyone who was a non-resident into the state. But as far as I know, you could be unvaccinated and still be granted entry into the state. So we were essentially stuck in no man's land and in the hands of the South Australian government as to what we could do next.
Just as a reminder for those that may be just tuning in at the moment, this is a reminder of the total deaths over the 5-year period in New South Wales, all the way through all the states, including South Australia and the Northern Territory. So have a look at that. In 2020, not a single death recorded in the Northern Territory. In 2021, there was 1 death, and in 2022, there was 52. In total, the whole period in the Northern Territory, 69 deaths. In South Australia, the total period, 1,232, the bulk of them in 2022 after the vaccine rollout and 95% take-up of adults was considered 16 and over. But in that period, just 4 deaths in 2020 and 3 deaths in 2021. And when you look at the case graph there, virtually no cases at all in the annual charts there of week by week from the blue of 2021, and only right there at the end there was a takeoff in that vaccine takeoff period. Just unbelievable statistics. Mariya, it's shocking to believe that the ignorance that these people were placing, that first of all, ScoMo came out in a very famous clip and said, we don't have compulsory vaccination in Australia. Now, I shared that clip at the time in a video that I put onto YouTube, and would you believe it, a year and a half later, it was taken off as sharing disinformation on YouTube of the Prime Minister of the country doing that. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to head into a break, but before we play that, I'm going to play you a clip with Del Bigtree and Peter McCullough. It's also going to talk about disinformation as it is pertaining to Jacinda Ardern, and then RFK Jr. is going to weigh in at the end. After that, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back to continue the conversation. You're watching the 51st State.
But you cannot say that there's no science on the other side. And that would be the only way you could even maybe get away with saying you're going to censor this conversation, because there's a bunch of crazy people that have no evidence, and then there's us. It's just not the case.
Well, let me tell you, I'm in my 4th decade of medical practice now. I'm the most published person in my field in the world in history prior to COVID, studying heart and kidney disease. The word misinformation has never appeared in any paper that I have written. It's never appeared in any textbook I have studied. It's never come up on a board question. And let me tell you what, I researched this. Misinformation appeared in the English literature around 1500. It was extensively used during Nazi Germany and other propaganda campaigns. And in 2018, Washington Post said misinformation was word of the year because it was used in partisan politics. Now enter COVID-19, and misinformation now is the tool. that government authorities, medical boards, other entities that really have a stakeholder position in the vaccine agenda, they're using the word misinformation as a propaganda tool.
We've also seen the spread of misinformation on COVID-19, particularly through social media. We had to act, so we made it a priority to establish a public interest journalism fund to help our media continue to produce stories that keep New Zealanders informed.
Meaning, if they hold information, everybody else holds misinformation.
We have live pictures from the protest at the moment. There's a lot of anger there.
The point that I would make here is that, yes, I've talked about mandates, but actually what I've heard a lot of misinformation and anti-vax messaging coming from the forecourt.
And they use the term vaccine misinformation. It has nothing to do whether it's true or false. It only has to do with what the political implications are.
And what has stood out to me is that fact that so many are there based on things that simply aren't true. It does come back to disinformation.
When they use the term vaccine misinformation, they are using it as a euphemism for any statement that departs from official government policies and pharmaceutical industry profit-taking.
Australian National Review is Australia's first real free and independent press. One with no editorial control by the elite, but a publication that can generate critical thinkers and critical debate, and hold those spreading mistruths and deliberate propaganda in mainstream media to account. News with a difference that will be educational, compelling, and create a platform for political and social change in this country, and address the real issues facing this country and the world.
Welcome back to the 51st State. Before the break there, the painting of the picture and just how disturbing it really is, that what we are seeing in real time, an absolute abuse of power. And we are seeing a failure to serve the people for whom government is appointed to do, and the standover tactics that we saw in real time as a result of what happened with COVID. And in this interview on the 51st State, we are telling the story, or retelling the story, of Mariya, who lived in South Australia, took a trip into the Northern Territory, and alongside her mother was put into a position where suddenly she had nowhere to go, and the state didn't want to know, at a time when there were 5 COVID cases and a death in that scenario over 2 years. Less than 8 people died from COVID in South Australia, and in Northern Territory, where she came from, just 1 person in 2 years. The heavy-handedness never seen before. We've gone on to talk about how the government of the day, which was the opposition, Anthony Albanese's then government opposition, promised they would have a COVID Royal Commission. They got into power and they didn't. And that was shown up on Sky News with Nationals Senate leader Bridget McKenzie explaining to the audience that this would mean that the states would be held to account. So we're seeing now how it's piling up. what we're going to do now is I'm going to bring Mariya back in, and now we're going to talk about the ramifications of what happened to her that could literally happen to anyone, and nobody is being held to account to this day. And bureaucracy does what it always does. Nobody takes responsibility, and they get to cover their tracks. And in the process, the people that they serve pay the price. It's always the innocent people. Mariya, I'll tell you what, you are beyond brave, and you haven't yet told the story, but I'd like you to now tell us how it goes downhill from here, because the world needs to know, because now New Zealand is in the story, Australia is in the story, and the United States. This affects every single human being in the West.
Yeah, sure. So it's quite an unbelievable story, really. And the sad part of it is many South Australians and potentially even Australians didn't know what happened to me until several years later. I mean, South Australia was quite compliant to the directives, so it wasn't as heavy-handed as Victoria, for example. We didn't have the extent of the 6-month lockdowns, which were actually the longest lockdowns in the world. So Melbourne had the longest lockdowns in the world. But back to myself. So upon pretty much entering into the border of the Marla checkpoint, coming back from my holiday with my mum, we were denied entry, and we spent about 3 hours at the border, and until we were granted entry to return back to our homes on compassionate grounds. So, to return back to our homes, that was considered compassionate grounds by the health department. So whenever SafePol didn't know anything, they would handball it onto the state, the health minister, and vice versa. So they played this game. We were actually told that upon driving back to South Australia, which was about 11 hours or 12 hours from the Marla checkpoint. Actually, I think it was about 12 hours. We weren't allowed to stop anywhere. We weren't allowed to fill up petrol. We had to proceed all the way until we reached our home because we were unvaccinated, which just is ridiculous in itself, because it's not possible to get back to Adelaide in that time frame without filling up fuel. So you're probably wondering what happened to me, but I was in December 2021, I was unlawfully arrested, imprisoned for 13 days in the highest isolation cell in South Australia, and I was denied bail 3 times until it went to the highest court in the state, and I was then released on home detention bail with an ankle tracker. So how did this happen? Well, it was simply because of my decision to maintain my bodily autonomy at the time and question the risks of the vaccinations and the other testing requirements. So initially we were advised that we would need to isolate for 7 days. My mother and I both complied with that requirement. And then virtually we just continued getting harassed by the South Australian Police. So for the next 10 days, when we reached our homes, arriving back to South Australia on the 24th of November 2021, we had police coming to our gate, jumping over our fence, knocking on all the bedroom windows, threatening to shoot the dogs, coming to my workplace, building a personal profile on me, questioning staff under duress to hand over details about me. Not that there was any incriminating details, but disclose private information. They even went to such great lengths as to attend my Christmas party and advise the hotel staff at the Christmas party to report me to them via 000 if I had attended, which of course I hadn't, because I realised at the time what was happening. So even though I had complied with my 7-day direction to quarantine, locked down to house arrest in my own home in South Australia together with my mum, they continued, denied us the ability to leave our homes and continued to police us very closely. Sometimes I had police coming to my home 3 times a day. So it got to a point where it was just really, unmanageable. It was, I didn't know when I'd be able to leave my home. You couldn't even really seek any legal advice at the time, because in order to be able to obtain legal advice, usually you have to go and meet a lawyer. And so I, on the 5th of December, I left my home to find out my rights about COVID testing, because the harassment and the interrogation just got so full on that I thought, what is a way out of this? Looks like the only way out of this is to go to the testing station. That day, obviously, South Australia Police was informed that I had left my home. I have no doubt that they were waiting for that to happen, despite advising me themselves that I had to leave my home to get tested. There were a number of things that you could actually leave your home to do, which was considered a reasonable excuse at the time. But somehow, of course, that didn't apply to me. None of their own requirements applied to me, such as, for example, the highest penalty for breaching a COVID direction, which I don't even want to call law because it's not law, was $1,000 expiation. But for me, it turned into 13 days of solitary confinement at the Adelaide Women's Prison. There was no other individual in South Australia that was handled so heavy-handedly as I was. And I believe that was purely because of my stance to expose, actually not even expose, to question and to refuse, the unlawful, what we now know as to be vaccines that relating, to death. So virtually on the 5th of December 2021, I was pulled over. I was arrested. I wasn't allowed to partake in an interview. I wasn't questioned why I left my home. And I had 5 police officers all surrounding my vehicle at the time. They were all male officers as well. It's all obviously a mechanism of intimidation that they use. At the time, I was only 31 years old. And as you can imagine, someone who's never been arrested, I've never really even been pulled over for having committed any alleged offence. It was really quite scary, an experience that you're put into that you don't expect to happen ever, to someone of my age, who had never committed any criminal alleged offences at the time. So what happened following that? So I was taken to the Adelaide City Watch House and again denied an interview. I wasn't given any information as to why I was arrested and why I was in custody, other than the fact that I had breached a section of the Emergency Management Act. So no charges at that point in time were laid on me until I attended or was to appear in court the following day. So I spent more than 24 hours in the cell next to alleged high-level criminals at the time. And at the hearing the next day, I was laid with 4 charges. This is what they do. They try and maximise the charges that they lay on you, so that obviously you have to now not defend just one charge, which was supposedly, a charge for leaving my home. It was all these other unrelated charges, such as not disclosing my particulars to the police, despite the fact that when they pulled me over, they quoted my name to me. So funnily enough, they knew my name already, but they charged me for refusing to provide my particulars, and other unrelated charges as well, such as having medication in my handbag that was not that it's not a substance that can be abused, but because obviously at the time I was working in the pharmacy industry, they wanted to implicate my workplace as well. So and 2 other COVID charges as well, directly associated with the alleged offence. So following that, I was sent to the Adelaide Women's Prison with an indefinite term. So my bail was denied, and
Mariya, at this point, did you have any legal representation, or were you self-represented?
I did have legal representation at the Adelaide City Watch House, because although I believe you probably could self-represent, it's very hard to have any rights when you're in custody.
Of course. My question there is that if you had representation, did they make an offer to the court in relation to your bail at that point?
Yes, they did. They requested that I should be granted bail, and South Australia Police put forward an argument that I had put the whole state of South Australia at risk, and I should be denied bail, despite the fact that they, in their own reports, stated that I was low risk as far as COVID is concerned. That's on all of the police records, and it's on all of the correctional services records. So what is the risk? I think the risk here is the fact that I was obviously a political prisoner in their eyes, and they wanted to make an example out of me, so that no one else who attempted to challenge the system or just purely to exercise their human rights would do so as a result of this case. So I was then I appealed bail for the second time. I'm lucky that my mum found out to do this, because if we had didn't meet that time frame, I would have likely spent 2 months in prison, not 2 weeks in prison, because that's just how the justice system works for court appearances.
Just on that, Mariya, can you describe for people, because this is the part that that many people would be in absolute agony listening to what you're saying, but the importance of describing that period where you were locked up. Can you describe what that was like? I know it's horrible to relive it, but I think it's very important from a human interest perspective of what people are up against, because there's two components, how one survives this and what goes through your head at this point, because the indefinite component of it, many would consider to be like torture if you don't know, if you have no end date, therefore. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. It was definitely a way of the state attempting to break me, because even entering into prison, I was heavily encouraged to take drugs such as sleeping pills and antidepressant drugs, because I was advised that I would need them because of the experience that I am about to enter in prison. I was in an isolation cell, which meant that I didn't actually share a room with anyone. Having said that, prior to actually entering that cell, the correctional services staff and the nurses had me share a room with another girl for about 4 hours. So, this supposedly alleged risk, biggest risk into the state of South Australia, supposedly being me at the time, was able to share a room with another girl. So it was really just a mockery of the whole system, because it wasn't again until I had to undertake all of the testing, where they weigh you, I was strip searched as well, which is not really an experience that, anyone should have to go through. And then, as I've said in previous interviews that I've had, it was like a charade, a circus charade, because the gloves, the goggles, the hazmat suits came out only after I had crossed this invisible line of danger and entered the cell, where I then spent the next 13 days. I was definitely discriminated for refusing to get vaccinated and PCR tested. I was offered that every single day until the prison guards, I think, got sick of me saying that I wasn't interested anymore. So they, I think by the second week, offered it to me every second or third day. But the nurses were working together with the prison officers, to pretty much push the same narrative, and that was if I refused to get tested and vaccinated, I'd never see the sunlight again. And that was drilled into me on a daily basis. So even things like I was denied, it was very if anyone knows what South Australia is like in December, it's usually very hot, can be up to 40 degrees, but the prison cells were freezing. It was really, really cold, but I was denied things like warm clothing for a certain amount of time. I was denied the opportunity to Zoom my family and friends because, the virus that I didn't have could travel through the computer as well. So unless I was double vaccinated, I wasn't able to speak to my family or my friends.
So, Mariya, that time there is tantamount to torture. What do you do to occupy your mind? Are you given a book, a newspaper, a scribble paper, something to occupy your mind, or do you just sit there on your own, just looking at the walls and the floor?
Well, the one thing that is unlimited in prison is mainstream media television. So you can, you do have a TV, and you have no limitation to how much you can watch of that. I was given a notepad as well, but I wasn't allowed to, I'm just trying to think now, I wasn't allowed to use a pencil because that's a weapon apparently. So even things like I had a lot of people write to me because they denied them to call through to me. So I didn't actually get most of that mail until the day that I left. So it arrived on the day that I had left prison. So, it was purpose delay techniques. I mean, it wouldn't have taken two weeks for mail in South Australia to be delivered to me. I did actually make conversations with one of the prison guards who took a strong liking to my situation, and I asked him about whether there were any other individuals in the cells who were also arrested and imprisoned as a result of breaching the COVID mandates. And he was quite alarmed because he said, "We don't know anyone else but you." The only other people that had at the time being arrested were overseas residents who were deported, which is awful as well. I mean, if you're on a visa, you virtually have absolutely no rights. But I mean, if a South Australian or Australian citizen has no rights, what other rights can there be for anyone who's not even a citizen? So, it appears that I was really the only individual at the time. I do know one other lady that was arrested and imprisoned for a day for refusing to get COVID tested at the Adelaide airport. But other than that, I don't know anyone else.
The abuse of power in relation to testing and the introduction of this asymptomatic symptoms. So in other words, you might have COVID even if you have no symptoms. During this period 2020 to 2021, did you ever get COVID or did you ever get cold or flu symptoms?
I never got COVID through the whole period of 2020 up to date. I definitely got sick. I mean, it's inevitable that you would get sick in a period of 5 years. But the illness that I experienced in 2022, which was the reason for why I actually couldn't attend one of my court hearings, was very, very unusual. And it was around the time that everyone was still quite actively getting vaccinated. And I think that was a reason as to the impact and the effect that it had on me, because I worked in an industry where people were getting vaccinated on a daily basis. I was around people who were, exposed to the technology that's used in these vaccines that's never been tested on individuals before. So I had really strange symptoms like numbness from the waist down, brain fog. I was bedridden with nausea, but I didn't have cold and flu symptoms such as your cough, your cold, your sore throat. So it was, quite unusual illness that I had that went for about 5 days. But it wasn't COVID.
It makes sense. And of course, very strange things happening to many people, whether they were going through this the COVID feeling. And of course, it evolved. It went from the first COVID to the Delta to the Omicron, and there were different symptoms. And as somebody who had COVID, it was the worst 48 hours of my life to that point. But that was it. It was 3 sets of symptoms, and they all went away, and that was it. You just survived it, and you did what you always did when you got cold and flu. You kept your liquids up. You took your Panadols or whatever you wanted to take, and you got over it. So, and then you think, was that it? What has all this fuss been about? And you don't even get those symptoms, and you're going through this process of intimidation, the pile-on, the example making, and these kind of stormtroopers in SAPOL police uniforms gathering around you who know who you are, and then trying to intimidate to a point that they want to create a charge for not giving particulars, for goodness sake, like any magistrate worth his or her salt would throw that out in the moment and just say, look, this is ridiculous, get out of my face. But this is not what goes on. Mariya, your story is one that it is so deeply troubling, and we haven't even got yet to what happens after the fact. But at the same time today, we're learning that it can literally happen to anyone, all the way up to, because this is an international story, the President of the United States can be picked on in ways that absolute power is now being exposed in the frame for the abuses that it does, with the obsession of keeping the power and closing people down and shutting them up. Now, we're going to take a quick break and come back for the conclusion of our interview. And as we do, I'm going to play you a clip from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today regarding exactly what happened in this whole Russiagate story, with the revelations of the classified report now being released. And it just shows you how the system can work against you, and a warning for all of us. We'll be back after this.
Well, I think a major organization of the national security apparatus, at least here at the White House within the National Security Council, has indeed taken place, and the president entrusts his current CIA director, John Ratcliffe, and our ODNI director, Tulsi Gabbard, to make the necessary changes to ensure classified intelligence, especially that could implement or hurt the national security of our country, does not make its way into the hands of irresponsible actors who want to politicize that intelligence for their own end. Since you brought up the declassification report that was put out by Senator Grassley today, I'm glad you brought it up, because this should be a story every outlet in this room should be covering. This is further evidence that Hillary Clinton approved the Russia hoax against President Trump. Her campaign financed it. Again, she approved it. And the FBI and the CIA were both weaponized to, as our director of CIA has said, accelerate this hoax against then candidate and former President Trump. To answer the heart of your question, the president wants to see justice served, and he trusts the Attorney General and the Department of Justice to implement that justice and hold these people accountable.
And welcome back to the 51st state. I don't know about you, but I feel like that we are dealing with the same problem that anyone who doesn't want to go along to get along, anyone who is being punished one way or another for challenging the system, from the individual in the street, in Mariya's case, all the way up to the President of the United States, there appears to be a system that will work against anyone, and silence is the only way that they can get control of you, and that is absolutely not on. Now, I have understood that Mariya's car was tampered with. That's how deep this goes. This is staggering. I'm going to bring Mariya back in right now. Mariya, can you clarify, is that true?
Yes, so the state South Australia Police went to such greats to scare me so that in the hope that I would just give up and plead guilty, that on the first day that I went back to work after having being off for 2 months as a result of this ordeal of being imprisoned and in home detention, that first day my brake wires of my car were tampered with. And I went to the mechanic who looked at the car and said to me that this was done on purpose, that it was a clean cut, and there was no way that it could have been a wear and tear.
Wow. Now, your life at this point, has it returned to normal at all? And are you trying to take some form of action? Because one would think that you would have to be entitled to some form of compensation from what's happened to you. What's your life like today?
My life has been anything but normal since 2021. I don't think many 30-year-olds would experience what I have gone through in the last 5 years. But the fight for justice is a really hard pill to swallow, because what I have come to realize, and everything that I experienced in the period of that 2 weeks in prison and following that in home detention, that was nothing compared to the fight that I then had to fight for the next now, how long has it been? 3 years, and I'm still fighting this injustice. So it took 18 months for the court to acquit me, because the police finally dismissed the charges, which just proves that they agreed that everything they did was criminal, that it was malicious prosecution, that it was false arrest, that it was unlawful imprisonment. Now, the courts denied me a written judgment to confirm the reasons for why I was acquitted. So even though on paper it says I'm not guilty and I was acquitted, usually you get a summary judgment which explains the reasons for the judge's decisions. Well, my case, like everything else in this case, was unique, because they decided to not follow the due process and publish those reasons. And even to this day, if you go onto the internet, you won't be able to find my COVID case, but you will be able to find another case, which is a driving matter that was completely irrelevant, that has been published. So they don't want to expose the truth and the reality of the outcome of this matter. They'll do everything they can to cover up the corruption, because what really truly happened is that the judiciary colluded with the South Australian police in this whole matter. And so I'm doing a judicial review at the moment on the Adelaide Magistrates Court for allowing this matter to proceed to trial when it was actually an expiable offence. I should have never even been arrested, let alone imprisoned for this matter. So it's what's called a erring in law. Now, this judicial review has been going on for 18 months now, and we haven't even gotten to the contents of what the judicial review is about, because the courts and the Crown keep adjourning this matter so as to purposely delay the process and to deny me justice. I've also just formally lodged a civil claim in the Adelaide Supreme Court, or Supreme Court of South Australia, so as to seek compensation and justice through that process, because the South Australia Police refused to negotiate on any payment for their criminal actions and for the injury that I obtained as a result of this. and for all of the loss of life, loss of income, loss of reputational damage that you can't get back. They've denied it all. So it's actually had to go to the formal process of going to court, and I wouldn't be surprised if this matter actually proceeds to trial. So yeah, that's where we're at the moment. But yeah, there really is no justice, and any solicitor that would have taken on this case, I believe, would have not gotten me the outcome that I was able to achieve, because at the time they were all far too scared about their reputation than to represent the best interests of the individual, because we really know that solicitors don't represent the best interest of the individual. They generally represent the best interest of the state and of their firm, and you're the last in that chain.
And that's because it's a commercial arrangement, and of course profits come first before anything else. And you are in the HR business, and you know all about employment and businesses in the business of making money, and it's a human resource. That's what it is. It's a factor of production. Your character was assassinated. You were mocked and ridiculed by the system. You were treated like a second-class citizen. You were treated with heavy-handedness. You were dismissed as a human being. Your human rights were trampled. You were meant to comply, to go along, to get along, and somehow you came out the other side and lived to tell the story that affects every single human being on earth today. You represent something that provides all of us the hope and the courage that we could be 1/10 as tough as you were, going through something that should never, ever have happened. And at the same time, we've learnt from the United States government, to which this show looks up to as a model to do something different, by identifying that this virus came from a lab. It was manufactured for the purposes of whatever those purposes were, but it does seem like it was certainly to make us all comply. That God spared you, and I never make religious claims on this show, to live to tell your story tells me that there's something bigger than all of us in this. And I am proud to know you, proud that you came onto this show, this humble little show, to be able to tell your story as a way of advancing the cause for all of us, Mariya. You inspire us, but I tell you what, the war is not over by a long shot. And we will be here as part of that to help serve all the community. And you, of course, for to live through this is just astonishing. It makes me feel shivers up my spine, tears in my eyes, and I'm sure the audience feels the exact same way. And this war and this battle of yours is not over. You've got a long way to go. And I hope that this forms just a little part of being able to tell that story and the awareness, because there are people all the way up to the very, very highest powers that need to be held to account, and they are dodging and avoiding it like you wouldn't believe. And that implies guilt more than anything else. And so we're amidst a process. And whilst you live to fight another day, the purpose of this is also to see who is going to come forward now and explain or work on how we're going to use the process against the system. And transparency is generally the best way to be able to do it, as bureaucrats and the judiciary and the police and the politicians go about their business to do whatever they can to cover their tracks and still believe that they can maintain power. And that's where we draw the line. Mariya Shmandiy, thank you for your time today on the 51st State, and more power to you.
And just to add to that, Jason, if you don't mind, I've just got a little quote as well that I obtained from the South Australia Police. And this proves that this was a case of making an example out of me, and that the South Australia Police wanted to do everything possible to obtain a conviction so as to maintain their reputation from the public image. And here they say, if SAPOL were to withdraw the matter, it would likely fuel the defendant's view that police not proceeding with the matter in an attempt to cover up police corruption and maladministration. Additionally, it would reduce the public confidence in SA police. So what does that say to us? I mean, really, words are written on the, what do they say? Words are stronger than anything there in itself. So I'm really honoured to be on the show today. Thank you for exposing the truth, Jason, and for allowing me to share my story again.
Well, it's staggering. And as you conclude there, it tells us everything that we need to know. And it is a line in the sand that we can no longer cross. And one must hope that with all of the ugly truth coming out, the truth shall set us free. With that, I thank everyone for watching. Please like, comment, share, follow, and get this story out there, because this affects all of us. And we'll see you all on